Learning. In this map from 1923, we can see a depicting of medieval Europe, and in it, some of the first universities that ever existed in the continent and the world. From the University of Lisbon in 1290 to Caen in 1437, Frankfurt in 1379, or Krakow in 1364. In fact, Europe has so many old universities that making a list showing each country's oldest one is almost unfair to them, because we'll only be able to point out one per country when sometimes a single country would occupy several slots in the top list of oldest universities in the world. In fact, from what I could find, at least the 36 oldest universities in the world are in Europe, all of them founded before the year 1500, 11 of them in what is now Italy, 7 in Germany, 5 in Spain, 5 in the UK, 2 in Portugal, 1 in Czechia, Austria, Poland, Switzerland, Denmark, and Sweden. This list includes medieval universities that were founded before 1500 and which have retained institutional continuity until today, although sometimes with brief periods of interruption due to wars or occupations. By the way, this video was made possible by the News Over Audio app. I'll talk more about NOAA and how you can get a free trial to their service at the end of the video. Other continents don't have as many old continuous universities as Europe does. But why? Well, mostly for two reasons. One, most of them were invaded, occupied, and colonized by European powers, making it so that the centers of learning of these European empires were concentrated in the European cities, while these other continents were simply explored or exploited for their human and material resources. And even when they were developed, education wasn't one of the main sectors. Not to mention the continuity element at stake here. While there may have been universities and institutions of higher learning in these places, they were likely destroyed or had their activity interrupted, either earlier on in history or by the Europeans themselves. For example, in what is now Bangladesh, the Chandrapur University existed, a monastery and institution of higher learning from the 10th century, preceding even the earliest European universities, but having been gone by the time they arrived. And China has a lot of these examples as well. And two, the definition used in most lists about this topic limits the term university to institutions with structural and legal features that developed in Europe, and which often exclude those other institutions of higher learning in the rest of the world. For instance, the Sankor Madrasa in today's Mali exists since 989 AD, but it was initially a mosque and center of learning created during the ancient Mali Empire. By the 14th century, it had been converted into a fully staffed university with the largest collection of books in Africa since the Library of Alexandria. And today, there are over 700,000 manuscripts in Timbuktu, with many of them dating to this school during West Africa's golden age. But because it doesn't match this technical criteria for what a university is under the European model, it doesn't show up in most of the top 10 oldest universities in the world lists when you look it up online. The Al-Azhar University in Cairo was also established in 970, but only gaining university status in 1961, almost 1,000 years later. The same happens with Morocco's University of Al-Qarawin, sorry for mispronouncing all of these, which existed since 859 AD as a mosque where people went to learn, but only fully adapted the European model in the 1960s. This would be the oldest university in the world if we were to consider it as such. Because of this, according to these perhaps unfair criteria, the oldest university in Africa would be Cape Town in South Africa from 1873. In Asia, the University of St. Thomas from 1645. In South America, the University of St. Marcus. In Peru from 1551. In Oceania, the University of Sydney from 1850. And in North America, Harvard from 1636, while Europe has Bologna from 1088. And other than Europe, these were all created by the colonizers, the British and the Spanish in these cases. In this map, color-coded by centuries, we can see the different times from which each area of the world has their oldest continuous university. South and West Europe were the first from the 11th or 12th centuries, then Central and Northern Europe followed in the 14th and 15th, Americas in the 16th century, Oceania in the 19th, and Asia and Africa in the 19th and 20th centuries, save a few exceptions here and there, like early colonial universities in other continents and specific countries which, having recently gotten their independence as new states, necessarily have more recent dates for their universities. So now that we understood what the topic of this video is and what the concept of university refers to in this case, let's do two things. 1. Learn which the oldest universities in the world are, and 2. Go through the entire world with that map I just showed and check out a few other interesting examples of these oldest continuous universities. Trying to make up for the perhaps unfairness of other institutions being left out, at the end I'll also mention a few of them. The 10 oldest universities in the world are the following: Bologna, Oxford, Cambridge, Paris, Salamanca, Padua, Naples, Lisbon/Coimbra, Valladolid, and Perugia. The corresponding countries are the ones we see on screen. Many of them were not at the time these countries yet. Only England, France, and Portugal were at the time nation-states as they are today. The rest belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, the Kingdom of Leon, the Crown of Castile, the medieval Commune of Padua, the Papal States, and the Kingdom of Sicily. The original dates are not precise in some cases, and different lists point to different ones, sometimes even in different orders, but I think this is a solid summary of what are usually seen as the 10 oldest universities in the world. Siena in Italy is also sometimes included in the top 10 list as being founded in 1240, but I found other lists with later dates, so I didn't include it. But if you notice any mistakes or debatable issues, just let me know in the comments. Bologna apparently began as a law school and appeared at this time when teaching outside of ecclesiastic schools began in Europe. An interesting bridge to the examples of the old learning center mosques in Timbuktu, Morocco, or Cairo. Ecclesiastical or church learning centers were also common in Christian Europe as they were in Islamic Africa. Prior to around the 13th century, monastic schools had been the most stable force of education in Europe. They were the repositories of knowledge, having many books copied by hand initially. And as late as 1200, the majority of students were still ecclesiastics. For example, at Bologna itself, no one could be made a medical doctor without permission of the archdeacon of the church. It was only gradually that universities began being set up and having their own educational authority to teach and grant degrees, with the permission and approval of the state and not also the church. Oxford was only organized in around 1200, but began teaching in 1096. In 1209, the masters suspended their teaching in Oxford and moved to other towns, including Cambridge, leading to the foundation of the university there. Paris's Sorbonne University emerged in around 1150 as a corporation associated with the Cathedral School of Notre Dame. In fact, Universitas is a Latin word for corporation, and this is associated with the idea of students forming types of organizations and guilds to organize their learning. At least initially, the teachers were masters from the church, and so it makes sense that this type of association of the old cathedral schools still existed. It was officially chartered in 1200 by Philip II of France and recognized in 1215 by Pope Innocent III, showing us the real power of the Catholic Church back then, that even a university had to be approved by the Pope. The name comes from its founder, Robert de Sorbonne, and it was eventually abolished by the French Revolution in 1793, but then returning a while later. Salamanca is the oldest university in the Hispanic world. The university was founded by Alfonso IX of Leon in 1218 and recognized by a papal bull from Pope Alexander IV in 1255. In similar fashion to Cambridge, Padua was also founded by scholars leaving Bologna. They were also the first university in the world to award a degree to a woman, Elena Cornaro Piscopia, in 1678. The University of Naples claims to be the oldest public university in the world, as one of the first to be founded by a head of state, Frederick II, King of Sicily. In fact, the school itself is named after him, and its seal is his portrait. It was Europe's first university dedicated to training secular administrative staff, a good example in the evolution of teaching and learning and its increased distancing from the church's initial monopoly. Lisbon was the original site of the first Portuguese university established in 1290, but then eventually moving to Coimbra in 1308. Coimbra's students over the centuries include many Portuguese historical figures like poet Luís de Camões, the mathematician Pedro Nunes, many statesmen, and Nobel Prize laureate Dr. António Egas Muniz. Valladolid also grew out of an old church school in the area and was at first a school of liberal arts and theology, and Perugia was granted official status in 1308 by Pope Clement V. but it's said to have begun teachings as far back as 1276. So now let's go over the entire world, using this map we saw earlier, and find out a few more interesting examples of universities throughout the world. Let's do this continent by continent. Like we saw, this top 10 was entirely within Europe, but the old continent has quite a few more old continuous universities. Charles University in Czechia, for instance, the University of Vienna, Glasgow, Copenhagen, or Uppsala, or the University of Istanbul, at the time Constantinople, founded in 1453 as a madrasa, an institute of higher education by the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. It was reformed to Western style of education in 1846 and gained university status in 1933. In Africa, the oldest is Cape Town, originally founded as the University of the Cape of Good Hope in 1873, in what was at the time the Cape Colony of the British. Sierra Leone today has the old colonial Fura Bay College since 1876, although it started operating as early as 1827 as an associate college of Durham University back in Great Britain, and Liberia established its own college in 1863. All other ones in Africa were founded or granted official university status after the year 1900, apart from Morocco, Mali, Egypt, or Tunis, which had significantly large centers of learning in mosques or madrasas, then converting into Western-style universities later on. The oldest modern university established by an independent African nation was the University of Addis Ababa in the Ethiopian Empire in 1950. In Asia, as we saw earlier, the oldest continuous university by these criteria is that of St. Thomas in the Philippines, founded by the Spanish Order of the Preachers in 1611. The second oldest is the Sedamampur College in India, at the time created by the Danish who had a colony there. The British Raj also established various universities in what is now India and Pakistan, but we should again remember the various higher learning institutions existed in these areas, which did not match the European model and were therefore not considered as universities. Lebanon's oldest university is from 1866, founded by the Ottoman Empire. Interestingly, it was then chartered by the state of New York and became the American University of Beirut in 1920. Japan's oldest university is the Ryokoku-1, but its origin goes further back to 1639 as the Daikyoku Great School for Buddhist monks. In China, the Qing Empire had the Nanjing University since 1888, but it traces its origins far back to a Confucian institution called Taisui, which was founded in 258. It was then the first institution in China to use the English term university. And in South Korea, the Sung Kyun Kwan University was established in 1398 as the highest educational institution of the Joseon dynasty. In 1895, it was reformed into a modern university. And this is an interesting thing because so many of these now universities existed previously and since much more ancient times as higher education institutions. It's just that they were higher education at the time, in the same way that Europe had its monasteries, which taught Latin to the sons of nobles. And as the evolution of societies went on and as new types of learning were discovered or needed, Europe created its universities model. And due to its control of the world through colonialism, they exported or imposed that model elsewhere as well, whether you consider this a good or a bad thing. The most recent universities in Asian countries are that of East Timor from 2000 and Bhutan in 2003. In Latin America, the 6 oldest continuous universities were founded in these nations by the Spanish Empire. In North America, the oldest is Harvard University, founded in 1636 and officially recognized in 1780. Canada's King's College is their oldest continuous one, first established in 1789 and receiving a royal charter to become an official university in the year 1802. Finally, in Oceania, the oldest was created in the New South Wales colony at the time, the University of Sydney in 1850. Through those African and Asian examples, we understand that those places did actually have way older educational institutions. They were just not, at least since their origin, universities according to the European model. So what if we scrape the university criteria and just look at the 10 oldest schools in the world? In that case, they would be the Shishi High School, the King's School, University Zitona, the Gymnasium Paulinum, the Al-Karawin Madrasa, the Al-Azhar one, the Sankor University, the Reykjavik High School, the Katedralskolan primary school in Sweden, or the University of Bologna itself in Italy. So we can see that only one modern university makes it into the top 10. And so by knowing how far back these universities and educational institutions date back to, we understand the importance that learning has had throughout all of history. And speaking of learning, before we go, a thank you to the sponsor of today's video, News Over Audio, also known as NOAA. NOAA is an app that provides you with the best of journalism via audio. They help you understand the news with spoken word articles from publishers such as The Economist, The Washington Post, The Telegraph, the Harvard Business Review, and many more. Their editors do a great job at helping you truly understand a topic by gathering several audio articles into topic-based playlists called series. One such example is their series looking at whether the US and Iran will reach a nuclear deal. It contains 4 articles offering in-depth analysis and perspectives from 3 different publishers. You can listen through iOS and Android apps, but also through web apps and virtual assistants like Alexa, etc. If you want access to over 20,000 audio articles, with new ones being added every day, just go to the link in the description and use the code GENERAL50 to get a 1-week free trial followed by a 50% off annual membership. Thanks to them for sponsoring this video. And so, that was a brief overview of the oldest universities in the world, which they are, how they came to exist, when they came to exist in each area of the world. Thanks so much for watching this video, subscribe if you liked it, and I will see you next time for more general knowledge.